You're making a decision in your business and it feels familiar, not really easy, but just familiar. You're following the same process, the same steps, maybe even the same reasoning you've used before. And, on paper it makes sense, but there's this quiet thought in the background. Why doesn't this feel like it's working anymore? That's the tricky part. Nothing is technically wrong. You're not making, reckless decisions. You're not ignoring your responsibilities, but you might be operating on autopilot. Because I know we've all been there. You feel like you're like, what am I even doing? Doing things the way you've always done them without ever stopping to ask if this still makes sense.
Today, we're going to unpack how assumptions like this quietly shape the way you run your business, why this is how we've always done it, quote unquote, can slowly limit your growth, and how to start questioning your decisions without spiraling into second guessing yourself. This is hitting really close to home because on my recent newsletter, I asked them to respond, and one person that reached out said she's a virtual assistant and she's helping a wedding florist, and she's been in the industry for 20 years, and she's just not open to new strategies or revising strategies for the same reason. This is how we've always done it, which is great. If it's working, don't change it. But maybe there's something that you can stop doing that will emphasize or have a better impact or ROI. And that's kind of where this episode is leading to. So if you're an entrepreneur or leader who's built habits, systems, or ways of thinking that used to work, or maybe kind of still work, but you're starting to feel that disconnect, this episode is absolutely for you.
You can now follow us on LinkedIn at Entrepreneur Encounter.
We're going to break this into 3 parts. So 1, how assumptions form without you realizing it, why they become dangerous in growing your business, and how to challenge them in a way that actually builds confidence instead of tearing it down. Most assumptions don't feel like assumptions. They feel like facts. They sound like, this is the best way to onboard a client. This is how I manage my team. This is how I make decisions. But if you trace them back, and a lot of these come from, your early days when you first started your business, your past experience that worked once, advice that you followed without questioning, and honestly just kind of going with it, just in survival mode. And over time, they stop being choices and start becoming defaults. Here's the shift. Just because something worked before doesn't mean it's going to work right now. Your business evolved, your capacity has changed, your goals got bigger, but your thinking, sometimes you're frozen in the earlier version of yourself. This reminds me of when we started our podcast. The way that our podcast is now is different than it used to be, because we were, taking on guests, and that was amazing, like connecting with all those guests and all, but we both felt there was a disconnect. We both felt like there was something that needed a change. And yes, sometimes you feel like, well, I'm going to stay in this spot because that's what I've known, and change is scary. But we made the decision together to revamp our show in a way that aligns with us better. I'm not knocking anybody down for taking on guests, but it's just depending on like how you want to do certain things in your business, and if you have a podcast, on how you want to run your own show as well.
And this matters in so many different ways. So I don't want you thinking this is just a mindset thing. This shows up in multiple areas of your business, and it can look like your team keeps hitting confusion points, but the process never changes. So it's just bumpy the whole way through. You're over involved in decisions because that's how you've always done it. You're not removing yourself from a situation. You might be one of those confusing points in the timeline that your team keeps hitting. Or you keep attracting the same type of client, even though you've outgrown them, you don't like working with them, insert whatever it is. And here's where that starts to get expensive. You're not stuck because you lack strategy. We're entrepreneurs, we're small business owners. I feel like we eat, sleep, and breathe strategy at this point. What
Yeah.
usually happens is you're stuck because you're operating inside of unquestioned assumptions of this is how we've always done it, or this is how so and so does it, so I should do that too. And this is one of the most dangerous phrases in a growing business because it sounds stable. Well, it worked for them, it'll work for me. But it often hides inefficiency, outdated thinking, and missed opportunities that, reflect who you are and your strengths and can help you get to the next level because you're taking time to look at why do you always do it this way? Is it working, like really working, or is it just I'm comfortable and I don't want to take the time to change it for a better outcome?
What if those things that you change like make a crazy impact on your business, right? So you can do one thing for so long and you're like, well, this is how I've been doing it all along. But what if you kind of step out of your comfort zone? Yes, it's scary. When I stepped out of my comfort zone and going to networking events and like having actual conversations with people, that is my strong suit, is having conversations with people, not posting on social media. I was told one time that, yeah, you have to put, you have to be on social media. You have to post, you have to do this. And I was burnt out and I was all like, I don't want to do this anymore. But now I'm bringing the fun back into that aspect. But I know what works for me is having conversations with people because that's how I've grown my business in the past. And that's, I'm getting back to that. So if something is not working, let's change it up a little bit.
I think that's a good question to ask right there is how do you challenge assumptions without spiraling into self-doubt? Everyone tells you should be on social media, but you hate social media. Or you hate feeling like you have to post on social media instead of having the fun part of it. So, but that can lead to the self-doubt because that's fear, right? Like if I start questioning everything, won't I lose confidence in my decisions? So let's work on figuring that out. So shift one that I recommend is replacing certainty with curiosity. And I know we've talked about curiosity before numerous times. This is something that I instill in my children, and like anything, instead of just diving off the deep end of accusations, replace that certainty with curiosity. So instead of asking, is this right or wrong? Ask, what am I assuming here? That one question creates space without judgment and can open up so many opportunities.
Another example for my personal experience, I love to learn and I try to learn. I'm curious. I want to figure out certain things. Being curious to me is obviously different than taking the action on something and actually like going all in it. So you can be curious about starting a YouTube channel, right? And then you start to learn about it and you're like, oh wait, that is not what I want to do. So being curious and trying to figure out certain things, and then that's when you can kind of figure out like, should I even do this? Because you don't want to assume. So if you want to start a YouTube channel and you're assuming that it's bad or assuming that it's not going to get you anywhere, have you been curious? Have you tried to dig into what that looks like and why that is? Now, if going back to learning what it is, and to me, that's a better way to make a decision than just assuming that whatever it is, whatever you want to assume and not take on something. So intuition feels intentional and, habits are automatic. So pause and ask, am I choosing this or just repeating it?
I think that's a big question, honestly. Honestly, that question has me wondering, how many of these things am I doing out of habit? Or am I intentionally making decisions to better my visibility and my bandwidth? I feel like that's a shift that even I still am working on, because a lot of we have SOPs and we have our, repeated tasks to make it easier and streamlined. But at some point, are you still choosing the right actions, or are there hiccups and you're just, habitually glazing over them because that's that part of the SOP is wrong and you just keep it moving because you're the only one that follows it. Who knows? Which leads us into shift number 3, which is test, but before you tear everything down.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially with like SOPs and, habits and following a streamlined process, please do not take what we're saying as you need to burn everything down to improve it. That is 100% not the case. And I could just feel so many operations managers getting angry at the prospect of that thought. So please don't take that. Test what's working. Give that SOP that you've had for years and never tweaked to someone, a different team member. So if it is something within your operations side of things, give that SOP and have someone in your marketing side run through it and test the process. Like they follow it step by step so that you can now see, oh, I need to tweak one step in this process, just one, or adjust how you run one of the meetings. Experiment with one decision differently. The good thing is you're not questioning your ability or your team's ability. You're just refining the approach and making sure it's up to date, still relevant, and still intuitive and growing with you instead of, oh, this is how we've always done it, and so this is the end of that. And it really doesn't actually work because there's missing pieces or tech has changed. Your client experience has elevated something.
Everything is changing all the time, and it's fast. It's so fast. It reminds me of that phrase, well, it's not my job. I don't have to do that. Like
that is outdated, and you should never think that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. That's what it reminds me of. It's so funny. Like, but yeah, another thing too, when you're experimenting, that allows feedback for something else as well. So like whoever is in your space, your partner, your co-host, your team, whomever is around you working with you, like, okay, we're going to just change this one process this week, see how it works, and allow people to provide that feedback, because that's also going to help determine on if you need to change a certain aspect of your business.
So let's bring this into a real world moment that I'm sure many of us have faced a time or two. You're onboarding a new client. Before you follow the same process you've used for months, you send the same emails, you're asking the same tried and true questions, and internally you or your admin assistant is thinking, this should be working better than it is. Granted, you're probably busy, and so taking the time to figure that out is not on the high priority list, but it's worth pausing and shifting, because through the lens of what am I assuming about this process, you realize you've been onboarding based on what you needed months ago or years ago when you first launched your business, not what your current clients need now, or not based off of the months and years you've had to like fine tune the process and really understand and better interpret or gauge what they need throughout the process. So from that, you can now adjust how you simplify communication, just clarifying expectations earlier, or break down that one really long email into bite-sized 2 or 3 emails. You remove steps that no longer serve and are no longer needed because of how you've simplified the communication. Same business, just a different outcome and a better feel for not only the client, but for you and your team as you are guiding these new clients into your partnership.
So going back to that feeling where you're doing everything the way you're supposed to, but something still feels off. That's not failure. That's awareness showing up. You are aware of what is going on, because oftentimes, more often than not, you are so close to it. That is what you've built. That is your baby. That, it means everything to you. So sometimes you don't see a lot of things going on, like maybe that's probably why you haven't made the decision to evolve and change. But when you start to realize and start to see, like, wait a minute, this is not working anymore. And that is okay to think that. Again, that is not failure. You're being aware of what's going on. So you just need to give yourself permission to ask, does this still make sense for me where I am now? Better thinking doesn't start with certainty. It starts with curiosity. So here's something to sit with after this episode. What in your business are you operating on assumption instead of intuition?
We would absolutely love to hear the answer to that question. So
Yes.
please feel free to reach out to us and share it. You can find us on LinkedIn or to email us. All of that information is going to be in the show notes. Until next time.
You can now follow us on LinkedIn at Entrepreneur Encounter.
Thanks for spending time with us today. If something in this episode gave you a fresh perspective, share it with a friend or send us a DM. We love hearing how these conversations land with you.
And if you're curious about how soft skills can support your next season of growth, we each have more resources to share.
You can find Dana on Instagram at danas.desk.nc for Pinterest strategy and intentional marketing.
And Sarah at UR Rembert for team development, business leadership, and podcast support.
Until next time, keep leading with purpose
and growing with intention.